The light is beginning to fade now, you know. It's that soft, bruised purple time of day in late winter when the world seems to hold its breath. The old grandfather clock in the hallway has just chimed 4, its voice as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. Dong, 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 dong. A steady, reliable sound in a world that so often feels anything but. I was just sitting here in my favorite armchair, the one with the worn floral pattern, stirring my tea. 2 sugars, just as I've taken it for, oh dear, 60 years or more. Some things never change, do they? As I drew the spoon out, I caught a glimpse of myself in its curved, silvery surface. It's a funny thing, seeing your reflection so warped and stretched. It shows you a face that is yours, but not quite. All blurry edges and magnified lines. These old hands holding the cup, they're a map, I suppose. A map of a life, with every wrinkle a road taken and every vein a river crossed. They've held crying babies and feverish foreheads, peeled 1,000 potatoes, and clasped another's hand in a final, silent goodbye. But as I looked at them today, my gaze drifted to the mantelpiece, to a small, unassuming object that has sat there for as long as I can remember. It's a silver locket, not the shiny kind, mind you. It's tarnished with age, softened at the edges from years of being held. It doesn't call attention to itself. Most people probably don't even notice it nestled between the framed photographs of my children and grandchildren. But for me, it's not just an object. It's a door. And today, the touch of that cold spoon against my fingers felt just like the cool metal of that locket. And just like that, the door swung open. It took me back to a time when my hands were smooth and unmapped, and my heart was a battlefield. It was the autumn of 1959, and I was faced with a choice that felt like it would either be my making or my complete and utter undoing. Back then, our world was smaller, quieter. We lived in a little terraced house in a town that smelled of coal smoke and damp wool. The war was over, but its shadow still lingered in the way our parents saved every bit of string and saw waste as a mortal sin. My father, a good man with a spine made of English oak, worked at the mill. His hands were calloused, his cough a constant, dusty companion in the house. My mother was the heart of our home. A woman who could make a feast from next to nothing and whose worry was a silent, humming thing that filled the spaces between the floorboards. And then there was Arthur. Arthur, he wasn't from our town. He was like a bird of paradise that had somehow landed amongst a flock of sparrows. He was an artist, you see. He'd come to the countryside to paint the honest light, as he called it. He had eyes the color of a stormy sea and a laugh that could startle you. He saw the world differently. He didn't see a gray, industrial town. He saw the stark beauty of the rooftops against a bruised sky. He didn't see a wilting flower. He saw the grace in its final bough. He saw me, truly saw me, in a way no one else ever had. We'd meet in secret, down by the old stone bridge where the river bent, or in the bluebell woods that time of year. He smelled of turpentine and wild air. He didn't bring me flowers. He'd bring me sketches of them, capturing their soul on paper. He'd read me poetry that made my heart ache, and he'd talk of a future in London, a life filled with color and passion and art, a life so different from the one I knew that it felt like a fairy tale. He gave me the locket one misty afternoon. It was simple, even then. So you can keep me close to your heart, Elara, he'd whispered, his breath warm in the cooling air, until we don't have to whisper anymore. But whispers were all we had, because my world and his were worlds apart. In our house, practicality was the only currency that mattered. Love was a luxury, a quiet, sensible thing that grew over years of shared hardship, not a wild, breathtaking fire. And our family was struggling. My father's cough was getting worse. The mill had cut his hours, and my mother's brow was permanently furrowed with worry. I saw the way she'd stare at the pantry, as if she could will more food onto the shelves. I heard the hushed, anxious conversations they had when they thought I was asleep. The weight of their unspoken fears settled on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. It was into this world of gray reality that David walked. David was the son of Mr. Henderson, who owned the local hardware shop. He was solid. That's the only word for him. He was a kind, decent, respectable man with a future you could measure and bank on. He had steady hands that knew how to fix things and a quiet smile. He started calling at our house on Sunday afternoons. He'd talk to my father about woodworking and compliment my mother's baking. His presence seemed to soothe the anxious humming in our little house. When he was there, my parents would smile a little easier. I could see the hope in their eyes, a hope that had nothing to do with poetry or paintings. It was the hope for a secure roof, for a future where their daughter wouldn't have to count every penny or watch her husband's health fail in a dusty mill. I knew what was happening. Of course, I wasn't a silly girl. Every polite conversation, every shared cup of tea, was a brick being laid in the foundation of a future they were building for me. I'd sit there, smiling politely at David, while my heart was miles away, down by the river with Arthur. The locket felt heavy under my dress, a secret betrayal. The moment of reckoning came on a Tuesday. I remember the smell of stew and boiled cabbage in the air. After we'd cleared the dishes, my father asked me to sit down. He didn't look at me, just stared at his hands on the worn tablecloth. "Elara," he began, his voice raspy, "David Henderson is a good man, a fine man. He's fond of you." My mother stood by the hearth, twisting her apron in her hands. "He spoke to your father," she said softly. "He wishes to formally court you. He wants to build a life, to provide for you." There it was, not a question, but a statement of fact, a solution to all their problems, wrapped up in a life for me. I looked at my father's tired face, at the desperation behind my mother's hopeful eyes. They weren't cruel people. They were loving parents, terrified of the future. They were offering me safety, security, a life free from the worries that haunted them. They were offering me David. And in that moment, all I could hear was Arthur's laugh. All I could feel was the promise of a different life, a life of color and passion, a life that was now hanging by the thinnest of threads. The silence in that little room was deafening, filled with the weight of everything I stood to gain, and everything I was terrified to lose. The days that followed felt like walking in a fog. My body went through the motions helping my mother, walking to the shops, nodding at neighbors, but my mind was a whirlwind. My parents' words hung in the air of our small house, unspoken, but ever present. They had presented David's courtship, not as a command, but as a blessing, a lifeline they prayed I would grasp. To them, Arthur was a ghost, a whisper of a rumor. David was real, solid, a safe harbor in a gathering storm. I had to see Arthur. I slipped out of the house the next afternoon, telling my mother I was going for a walk to clear my head. The air was crisp, and the fallen leaves crunched under my feet like broken promises. I found him in our woods, dabbing paint onto a canvas, trying to capture the melancholy gold of the autumn light. The moment he saw me, his face broke into that beautiful, heart-stopping smile. "There you are," he said, wiping his hands on a paint-stained rag. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten me." He came over and took my hands in his. His were warm, smudged with green and ochre. "What is it, Elara? You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders." I couldn't hold it in. The words tumbled out about David, his intentions, the conversation with my parents, the hope in their eyes. I watched his smile slowly fade, replaced by a deep furrow between his brows. He let go of my hands and walked back to his easel, staring at the half-finished painting. "So, they want to marry you off," he said, his voice flat. "To the shopkeeper's son, sensible, practical." He picked up a brush, but didn't paint. "And what did you say?" I said nothing. I needed time to think. I cried, the injustice of it stinging my eyes. "Arthur, you have to understand. My father, he's not well. They're scared. We're all scared." He turned back to me, his stormy eyes flashing. "But we don't sell our souls for a bit of security. What about us? What about London? What about the life we talked about? Was that just a pretty story for a summer afternoon?" "No, of course not," I insisted, stepping closer. "That is the life I want. But it's not that simple." "It is that simple," he argued, his voice rising with passion. "You choose love, or you choose that a life in a cage, a comfortable, well-fed cage, but a cage all the same. Don't you see? They don't care about your happiness, not really. They care about their comfort." His words hurt because a part of me feared they were true, but another part knew they were unfair. My parents loved me. Their fear was born of love, a desperate protective love I couldn't simply dismiss. We argued, our voices sharp in the quiet woods, until we were both breathless and miserable. Finally, he softened, pulling me into his arms. He smelled of paint and damp earth, the scent of my secret world. "I'm sorry," he murmured into my hair. "I'm just so afraid of losing you. Don't let them do this to us, Elara. Promise me." I promised, but the word felt fragile, a piece of glass in my throat. Just 2 days later, I had my first formal outing with David. It was a Saturday, and he took me for tea at the Willow Tea Room in the town center. It was the nicest place in town, with starched white tablecloths and little silver pots for the jam. I wore my best dress, a simple navy blue one my mother had sat up all night altering for me. David was a perfect gentleman. He held the door open, pulled out my chair, and spoke to the waitress with a quiet courtesy. He asked me about my day, about the book I was reading. He spoke of his plans for the hardware shop, how he wanted to expand it, maybe add a small section for gardening supplies. His dreams were tangible, made of wood and nails and profit margins. They were a world away from Arthur's dreams of light and canvas and soul. There were no awkward silences, but there was no spark, either. The conversation was like a placid, gently flowing stream, while conversations with Arthur were like a crashing wave, thrilling and dangerous. David noticed a loose thread on my cuff, and, instead of just pointing it out, he asked if I had a moment. He then took a tiny pair of scissors from a small toolkit he carried in his coat pocket and neatly snipped it off. "There," he said with a small, proud smile. "Can't have you unraveling." It was such a simple, practical gesture. It was so David. He saw a problem and fixed it. Arthur would have written a poem about the loose thread, about its journey and its longing for freedom. I looked at David's hands, clean and capable, and thought of Arthur's, stained with the colors of his soul. As he walked me home, the evening air growing cold, he paused at my gate. "Ilara," he said, his voice earnest, "I know this is all very sudden, and I know your parents are keen, but I want you to know, this isn't just about them. I've admired you for a long time. You're kind, and you have a quiet strength. I believe we could have a good life together, a happy one." He didn't try to hold my hand. He didn't press for an answer. He just stated his intentions, honestly and openly. And then he wished me a good evening and walked away. I stood there, watching his solid, reliable figure disappear down the street. He was a good man, a kind man. My parents were right. He would give me a safe and comfortable life. He would take care of me, and in doing so, he would take care of my family. He was offering me peace. So why did it feel like I was suffocating? I went inside, the scent of his sensible wool coat lingering in my mind, and the weight of the locket under my dress felt heavier than ever, a cold, hard secret against my skin. I was standing between two worlds, and I knew, with a dreadful certainty, that I would soon have to choose which one to abandon forever. The autumn began its slow retreat, giving way to the first sharp bites of winter. The world outside my window seemed to be turning the same shade of gray as my own heart. David became a regular fixture in our lives. He'd come for dinner every Thursday, and he'd take me for a walk or to the cinema on Saturdays. Each visit was a lesson in quiet decency. He'd bring my father a special blend of pipe tobacco he'd ordered, or a bag of my mother's favorite boiled sweets. He never arrived empty-handed. He was weaving himself into the fabric of our family, stitch by careful stitch, and my parents' relief was a tangible thing, a warmth that pushed back against the encroaching cold. My meetings with Arthur, however, grew more frantic and scarce. The woods were too cold and damp now, so we found moments in the back alley behind the bakery, shivering in the steam that billowed from its vents, or for a fleeting, desperate conversation in the hushed aisles of the library. The joy of our secret world was being replaced by a gnawing anxiety. The locket no longer felt like a promise. It felt like a countdown. "He's buying them," Arthur said bitterly one afternoon, his voice a low growl. We were huddled by the canal, the water a sheet of murky glass. "He's buying your parents with tobacco and sweets." "That's not fair," I whispered, pulling my thin coat tighter. "He's just being kind." "It's not kindness, Ilara. It's a transaction. Can't you see it? He's making you a part of the deal." His words were cruel, but they echoed the fears that kept me awake at night. Was I just a pawn in a game of survival? Was this love or just logistics? My life felt split in two. With David, I was calm, polite, and terribly old. I was playing a part, the sensible young woman, making a sensible choice. But with Arthur, I was alive. My heart would beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs, my senses sharp, the world vibrant and full of terrifying, beautiful possibilities. Leaving him after our stolen meetings felt like stepping from a world of color into a black and white film. By the way, dear, as I sit here telling you all this, I find myself wondering about you. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? Is it morning for you, or late at night, like it is for me now. It's a comfort, to think that my story is traveling, finding a little corner in your world. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. It makes the world feel a little smaller, a little less lonely. Now, where was I? Ah, yes, the breaking point. It came a week before Christmas. David had taken me to see the town lights being switched on. It was cold, and families were huddled together, their breath misting in the air. He bought me a cup of hot chocolate that warmed my frozen fingers. As we stood there, surrounded by the cheerful, ordinary happiness of it all, he turned to me. Alara, he began, his voice serious. He reached into his coat pocket. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew what was coming. He opened a small, dark blue box. Inside, on a bed of velvet, was a ring. It wasn't large or flashy. It was a small, brilliant diamond, flanked by 2 tiny sapphires, set in a simple, gold band. It was a sensible, beautiful, perfect ring. I know I'm not a poet, he said, stumbling over the words slightly. I can't offer you grand adventures, or a life in the clouds. But I can offer you my whole heart, Ilara. I can offer you a warm home, a steady life, and my promise that I will spend every day trying to make you happy. Will you be my wife? The joyful sounds of the crowd faded away. All I could hear was the frantic beating of my own heart. I looked from the ring, shining under the new Christmas lights, to his honest, hopeful face. I couldn't say yes, but I couldn't say no. I couldn't crush this good man, and I couldn't betray Arthur, and I couldn't break my parents' hearts, so I did the only thing I could. I stalled. David, it's beautiful, I managed, my voice a thread. Can you give me a little time? Just until Christmas. It's a very big decision. He looked disappointed, but he nodded, ever the gentleman. Of course, he said, closing the box. Take all the time you need. The next day, I found a letter, slipped under our door. My name was on the front, in Arthur's wild, artistic scrawl. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was short, but every word was a THUNDERCLAP. My dearest Ilara, I saw you with him last night. I know he asked you. I can't live like this anymore, waiting in the shadows for a heart that might not be mine. This half-life is killing me. I am leaving for London on the day after Christmas. I have a train ticket for you, too. Meet me at the station, platform 2, at 10 o'clock. If you are there, we will start our life together. If you are not, I will know your answer, and I will never return. Yours, always, Arthur. I sank down onto the cold linoleum of the hallway, the world tilting on its axis. In my pocket, I could still feel the phantom weight of David's ring box. In my hand, I held Arthur's letter. One was a promise of a safe, predictable life. The other was a leap into a terrifying, passionate unknown. An ultimatum, a choice between 2 futures, 2 men, 2 versions of myself. And the clock was ticking. Christmas was just days away, and it no longer felt like a time of celebration, but a deadline for the end of my world. The week leading up to Christmas was the longest of my life. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall felt like a hammer blow, counting down the seconds to my impossible choice. Arthur's letter was tucked inside an old poetry book in my room, its sharp corners a constant reminder. David's proposal hung in the air between me and my parents, a question they were too polite to ask, but too anxious to ignore. I tried to see things clearly, to make a list of pros and cons in my head like a sensible person would. On one side, there was Arthur. Life with him was a thrilling, terrifying unknown. It was a tiny, cold-water flat in London, the smell of paint, the sound of poetry, the struggle for money, and a love that felt as essential as breathing. It was a life for me. On the other side was David. Life with him was a neat, sturdy house in the town I'd always known. It was the smell of sawdust and fresh linen, the sound of a steady income, the absence of worry, and a gentle affection that promised to grow into a strong, reliable love. It was a life for us, for me, my parents, the family unit. But it was never just an abstract list. Reality had a way of making its presence felt. One afternoon, I went to the bakery to buy a loaf of bread. Mrs. Higgins, a woman my mother had known for years, was behind the counter. "Just the one loaf today, Alara?" she asked, her voice kind. As she wrapped it, she sighed. "Things are getting dear, aren't they? It's a struggle for everyone." Her words, so simple and true, hit me with surprising force. A loaf of bread. It was the most basic thing, yet for so many, It was a source of daily anxiety. Walking home, I clutched the still warm loaf to my chest. This was the world my parents lived in, the world of worrying about the price of bread. Arthur, in his passion for art and beauty, didn't think about these things. He lived on air and dreams, trusting that the universe would provide. David, on the other hand, built his life on providing. He understood the profound comfort and dignity in being able to afford a loaf of bread without a second thought. That evening, my father came home from the mill looking exhausted, a fine layer of dust seeming to cling to him like a second skin. He coughed, a deep, rattling sound that shook his whole frame, and I saw my mother flinch. Later, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "They're letting another 5 men go after the new year," my father said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Tomlinson, with 4 little ones. I don't know how he'll manage." "We'll be all right, George," my mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Ilara, David is a good boy. He'll look after her. He'll look after all of us." I froze outside the door, my hand on the knob. He'll look after all of us. My mother wasn't just thinking of my future. She was thinking of their survival. My marriage to David wasn't just my safety net. It was theirs. If I ran away with Arthur, I wouldn't just be choosing a different life for myself. I would be actively taking away the hope that was keeping my parents afloat. I would be leaving them to face the rising tide alone. The weight of that loaf of bread in my hands earlier suddenly felt immense. It was the weight of responsibility, of duty, of the quiet, unglamorous love that holds a family together. I spent the next few days observing David, really observing him. I watched him listen patiently to my father's rambling stories. I saw him discreetly slipping my mother a few extra shillings when he thought no one was looking, telling her it was an overpayment on an order. I saw the way he spoke to the children in the street, with a gentle, unforced kindness. He wasn't a poet, it was true. He didn't set my soul on fire, but he was a good man. He was fundamentally, thoroughly good. His love wasn't a storm. It was a shelter. On Christmas Eve he came to our house. The air was thick with the scent of cinnamon and roasting meat. He didn't bring a gift for me. Instead, he brought a huge hamper for the family. It was filled with things we couldn't afford: a proper Christmas pudding, a bottle of sherry, a whole cooked ham, jars of jam and pickles. It was an act of profound, practical generosity. As he was leaving, he and I stood for a moment on the doorstep. Snow had begun to fall, soft, silent flakes, dusting his shoulders. "I'm not trying to pressure you, Ilara," he said softly, looking out at the whitening street. "Your answer is your own. I just want you to be happy." I looked at his earnest face, illuminated by the warm light from our doorway, and I felt a wave of something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't the wild passion I felt for Arthur, but it was a powerful emotion nonetheless. It was a deep, aching sense of gratitude and respect. I thought of the life he was offering, a life of warmth, of safety, of being cared for. Then I thought of the life Arthur was offering, a life of uncertainty, of struggle, of passion, a beautiful, selfish life. I went up to my room and sat on my bed for a long time, the sounds of my family's quiet celebration drifting up from downstairs. I pulled out Arthur's letter and read it one last time. "Meet me at the station." It was a call to an adventure, a call to my own heart's desire. But as I sat there, in that small, cold room, I realized that sometimes a person's heart is bigger than just their own desires. It has rooms for other people, for duty, for the heavy, beautiful weight of family. I looked out my window at the falling snow, blanketing the world in a clean, quiet white, and I knew, with a certainty that was as peaceful as it was painful, what I had to do. The day after Christmas was cold and bright. The new snow crunched underfoot, and the air was so clean it hurt to breathe. In my pocket I carried a small, sealed envelope. My heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. I had told my parents I was going to the library to return a book. It wasn't a complete lie. The book was in my bag, its presence a small anchor to the ordinary world I was about to shatter for someone. I didn't go to the library first. I went to the woods. Our woods. The bluebell woods. They were stark and skeletal now, the trees bare against the pale blue sky. I walked to our spot by the old stone bridge. I didn't know if he would be there, but I had to try. I couldn't just let him wait at the station. He deserved more than that. He was there. He was pacing back and forth, a small, worn suitcase at his feet. He looked thin, his cheeks hollowed by anxiety, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. He rushed forward, a hopeful, desperate smile on his face. Ilara, you came. I was so afraid. He reached for me, but I took a step back. I couldn't let him touch me. If he did, I knew my resolve would crumble. Seeing the hope in his face was like a physical blow. Arthur, I began, my voice trembling. I'm not going. His smile vanished. It didn't just fade. It was extinguished, like a candle flame in a sudden gust of wind. What? He whispered. What do you mean? You're not going. I can't, I said, the words tearing at my throat. My family, they need me. I can't leave them. I held out the envelope. Your letters? I thought, you should have them back. He stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. He didn't take it. So that's it, he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and fury. After everything, all our talks, all our dreams, you're choosing him. You're choosing the sensible life in the gray town. I'm choosing my family, I said, my own voice rising. I'm choosing to not let them suffer because of what I want. That's not a gray choice, Arthur. It's the hardest choice I've ever had to make. It's the coward's choice, he shouted, and the sound echoed in the silent woods. You're too afraid to live, so you're choosing to exist instead. I thought you were different. I thought you were brave. His words were daggers, and they found their mark. Tears streamed down my face, freezing on my cheeks. Maybe I am a coward, I sobbed, but I won't be selfish. I won't build my happiness on the ruins of theirs. He just stared at me for a long moment, his stormy eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. The anger drained out of him, leaving behind a vast, empty landscape of hurt. I see, he said, his voice suddenly quiet, defeated. He finally took the envelope from my outstretched hand. He wouldn't look at me. He just picked up his suitcase. Goodbye, Ilara, he said, and he walked away without a backward glance, his lonely figure receding through the bare trees. I stood there, watching until he was gone, feeling a part of my own soul walk away with him. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen. Eventually, my legs started moving, carrying me back towards the town. I felt numb, hollowed out. The world had lost its color. That evening, I gave my answer to David. He came to the house, and we sat in the front parlor. My parents were hovering in the kitchen, the silence from their room a testament to their anxiety. I didn't look at David at first. I just looked at my hands, lying empty in my lap. David, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. If your offer still stands, my answer is yes. A slow smile spread across his face, a sunrise of pure, uncomplicated joy. Ilara, he breathed, you've made me the happiest man in the world. He took my hand and slipped the ring onto my finger, the small diamond and the 2 sapphires. It felt cool and heavy, a promise, a shackle. I wasn't sure which. My parents bustled in then, their faces alight with a relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. My mother hugged me, weeping with joy. My father shook David's hand, his back a little straighter, his eyes a little brighter. There was laughter and talk of the future, of wedding plans and a new home. I smiled and nodded, playing my part. I was making them happy. I was doing the right thing, but inside, I felt like a ghost at a feast. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror in my small room. I looked at the girl with the ring on her finger. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed. She looked like a stranger. This was my life now. The path was chosen. The gate behind me closed and locked. Arthur was on a train to London, to a life of art and passion. And I was here, in this quiet town, engaged to a good man I did not love. I had sacrificed my heart for my family's security, and as I stared at my reflection, the only question that remained was whether I could ever learn to live with the ghost of the girl I was supposed to be. We were married in the spring. It was a simple ceremony at the local church. I wore a modest white dress my mother and I had made, and I carried a bouquet of daffodils, their cheerful yellow a stark contrast to the quiet gray in my heart. David looked so proud, his face beaming as I walked down the aisle on my father's arm. Our families and friends filled the pews, their faces reflecting the simple joy of the occasion. I smiled, I said my vows, and I felt the cool gold of a wedding band slide onto my finger, next to the engagement ring. It felt final. The first few years of our marriage were an exercise in quiet adjustment. We moved into a small, sturdy house that David had bought, not far from my parents. He filled it with solid, practical furniture. I filled it with the scent of baking and the gleam of polished wood. We were polite, we were considerate, we were 2 people sharing a space, a life, a bed, but there was a careful distance between us. a space I kept clear for the ghost of Arthur. David, bless his heart, was a patient man. He never pushed. He seemed to understand, on some intuitive level, that I was a garden that needed time to grow. He showed his affection not in grand pronouncements or passionate embraces, but in small, everyday acts of care. He'd fix a loose floorboard without being asked. He'd bring me a cup of tea in the morning before he left for the shop. If he saw I was tired, he'd insist on doing the washing up after dinner. His love wasn't a fire. It was a lamp, lit consistently every single day, providing a steady, gentle glow. And slowly, so slowly, I almost didn't notice it happening, that steady light began to warm me. The hollowness inside me began to fill, not with the wild passion I had lost, but with a different emotion, a deep, abiding affection, and a profound sense of gratitude. I began to see David not as the man who wasn't Arthur, but as the man who was, simply, David, my husband, a good, kind, reliable man who was building a life with me, for me. Our first child, a son we named James, was born 2 years after we were married. The moment I held that tiny, red-faced baby in my arms, something inside me shifted irrevocably. A new kind of love, a fierce, protective, all-consuming love, flooded my heart, washing away so much of the lingering grief. When I saw the look on David's face as he held his son for the first time, a look of pure awe and wonder, I felt a connection to him that was deeper than any I had felt before. We weren't just two people in a house anymore. We were a family. A daughter, Catherine, followed 3 years later. Our house was filled with the noise and chaos of small children, with laughter and tears and the pitter-patter of tiny feet. My life was a whirlwind of nappies and school runs and scraped knees. There was no time to dwell on the ghosts of the past. My hands were full, and so, I discovered, was my heart. Occasionally, I would hear whispers of Arthur. A cousin who visited London would mention a small exhibition in a gallery, or I'd see his name mentioned in a newspaper review someone had left on the bus. He had achieved a measure of success, it seemed. Each mention was like a faint echo from another lifetime. It brought a small pang, a fleeting what if, but it was no longer a sharp, tearing pain. It was a gentle melancholy, a nostalgia for a girl I used to be. David and I grew old together. The years smoothed our edges and deepened our understanding of one another. The quiet affection grew into a comfortable, easy love, a partnership built on a foundation of shared memories, shared struggles, and shared joys. We saw our children grow up, get married, and have children of their own. My parents lived out their days in peace and security, their worries finally laid to rest. My father passed away peacefully in his sleep, and my mother followed him 2 years later, her heart simply tired. I held David's hand at both their funerals, and his solid presence was my anchor in a sea of grief. He was my anchor for 52 years. Then, one autumn morning, his own anchor gave way. His heart, the one that had been so steady and so strong for so long, simply stopped. He passed away in our favorite armchairs, a book open on his lap. The quiet in the house after he was gone was a physical presence. A silence so profound it roared in my ears. In the lonely days that followed, I finally understood the full measure of the life he had given me. He hadn't given me a life of wild passion, but he had given me a life of profound peace. He had given me a family. He had given me a home. He had given me a love that was as real and as true as any poem. As I was sorting through his things, I found a small, locked box in his desk drawer. Inside was every card I had ever given him, a pressed daffodil from our wedding bouquet, and a small, faded photograph of me from our first year of marriage. I was standing in our garden, not quite smiling, a guarded look in my eyes. On the back, in his neat handwriting, it said, "My Elara, waiting for her smile." It was then I finally broke down and wept, not for the love I had lost all those years ago, but for the quiet, patient, extraordinary love I had been so lucky to find. And so, here I am, back in this armchair, the tea in my cup now cold. The grandfather clock has just struck 5, and the room is filled with the long shadows of the late afternoon. It's funny how a whole lifetime can spool out from the simple act of stirring a cup of tea. 60 years, gone in a flash, yet filled with more than I could ever have imagined on that cold winter's day when I made my choice. For years after Arthur left, I kept the locket tucked away in a drawer, unable to look at it, but unable to throw it away. It was a symbol of a painful sacrifice. But after David passed, I took it out. It seemed different to me then. Less a symbol of what I had lost, and more a part of the long, winding road that had led me to where I am now. That's when I moved it to the mantelpiece, not to hide it, but to accept it, to make it a part of the story of our home. My hand, this old, wrinkled hand, reaches out now and picks it up. The silver is cool against my skin. The clasp is stiff, but my fingers know the trick of it. With a soft click, it opens. Inside, there are two tiny compartments. For the longest time, both were empty, a heart with two vacant rooms. But many years ago, I decided to fill them. On the right side, I placed a tiny photograph, trimmed with nail scissors to fit the oval frame. It's a picture of David, taken on our 25th wedding anniversary. He's smiling, his eyes crinkling at the corners, the picture of a happy, contented man. He is the symbol of my life, the life I built, the life of peace and family and quiet, enduring love. On the left side, there is no photograph. There is a tiny piece of paper, folded into a minuscule square. My fingers, though a bit stiff, are still nimble enough to unfold it. It's a tiny, exquisite sketch of a single bluebell, drawn in faded ink on brittle paper. It was the first thing Arthur ever gave me, tucked into a note asking to meet me for the first time. It is the symbol of my youth, of a different path, of a wild and passionate love that burned so brightly. You see, my dear, for so long I believed I had to choose between two loves, that accepting one meant betraying the other. I thought my life was a story of sacrifice, but I was wrong. Looking at this locket now, I understand. My life was not a sacrifice. It was a choice between two different, but equally valid, kinds of life, and two different kinds of love. The fiery, all-consuming love I felt for Arthur was real and beautiful. It was the love of poetry and dreams, the love that makes you feel like you can fly. It taught me that my heart had a capacity for great passion. I will never dishonor that memory. It's a part of me. But the quiet, steady love that grew between David and me was just as real, just as profound. It was the love of shared burdens and small joys, the love that builds a foundation strong enough to withstand any storm. It was the love that gave me my children, my grandchildren, this warm home, this peaceful life. It taught me that the heart also has a capacity for great strength and endurance. We are so often told that we must follow our heart, but we are rarely told that the heart can have more than one path. We think happiness is a single destination, but it's not. It's a landscape with many different views, some from fiery mountains, others from quiet, green valleys. My valley was beautiful. It was filled with a life that mattered. I don't regret my choice. I mourn the man I hurt, and I treasure the memory of what we had, but I do not regret the life I built with the good, kind man who waited patiently for my smile. So, if there is any wisdom in these old bones, it is this: do not be afraid of your choices. Every path has its own beauty, its own sorrows, its own lessons. The life you live is just as important as the one you dream of. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is not to run towards the fire, but to stay and tend to the gentle lamp that lights the way for others. I close the locket now. Click. The two halves become one again, holding both my histories inside. David and Arthur. The life I lived and the life I let go. They are not at war in my heart anymore. They are just my story. And it is a good story. It has been a good life. Now, I think it's time for another cup of tea.